Good morning, everyone. We are in the third parak of Sefer Ezra. And as you recall, last week, we had learned about the fact that 42,000 people plus came to Eretz Yisrael with Zerubbabel, Sheshbatzar, and with apparently a wave of different aliyot that took place over a period of time. But they finally got there, and the pasuk begins. The first pasuk actually begins with the phrase "Vayiga hachodesh hashvi'i." That this is a case of, for those who love dikduk, of binyan kal b'horat hif'il. That instead of uvehagia, that we have vayiga. That they arrived in the seventh month. Uvnei Yisrael. I'm sorry. When the seventh month arrived, Uvnei Yisrael be'arim. And the Jews had already begun settling the various cities where they had come from in Binyamin and Yehuda. And at that point, the beginning of the seventh month, in other words, we're talking about Chodesh Tishrei, the people gathered together, Ke'ish Echad, like a single corpus, towards Yerushalayim. Now, this phrase, Ke'ish Echad, means two different things simultaneously. First of all, when you gather as one group, it implies, the Ibn Ezra suggests, a sense of hurriedness, that they all came together. So I guess the way we would say it in English, they all came together, Yerushalayim. But at the very same time, there seems to be this echo of another time where they came Ke'ish Echad, okay? Ish Echad B'lev Echad. We talk about the idea that the Jewish people, when they were going to be getting the Torah at Har Sinai, they gathered together as a single corpus as well. And it sounds like that same kind of thing happening. There's something momentous, obviously, that's going to be taking place. Vayakom Yeshua ben Yotzadak ve'echav haKohanim. And at that point, Yeshua, who is Yehoshua actually, and his brethren, the Kohanim, and Zerubbabel ben Shealtiel ve'echav, and also Zerubbabel, who is one of the political leaders of the people, they all, and his brethren, Vayivnu et Mizbach Elokei Yisrael, and they built the Mizbeach Lahalot alav olot, in order to offer on it the olot, the korban olam, kakatu b'torat Moshe Isha Elokim, just as it's written in the Torah. Now, it's interesting at this point, is if you notice for just a minute, normally, by the way, we'll see throughout Sefer Ezra, Zerubbabel is going to be mentioned first. Because there's a simple principle, and the principle, it comes from the Gemara in Horiot, that teaches that all of the times, Melech Kodem LeKohen Gadol. A king has preference over the Kohen Gadol. Yeshua is the Kohen Gadol. Zerubbabel most likely is the governor, the Pacha of the area. And so every other place will encounter the two of them together, the order is flipped. And yet here is a situation where, because the focus of this pasuk is totally on the Beit HaMikdash, in other words, the focus is totally on that realm which Yeshua is in charge of. Therefore, in this pasuk, Yeshua will come first. Now, their purpose was to be able to begin to bring the olot. Which korbanot are considered the olot? We'll see in a moment that we're talking, as Mitzudat David says, we're talking about the korban tamid. It's interesting that there is a fascinating machloket that exists between the Rambam and the Ravid. The Rambam and the Ravid were protagonists. They were great poskim of our history. And when you look in the Rambam, in Hilchot Beit HaBchira, in the sixth parak, there is this issue of the status of the Temple Mount nowadays, after the destruction of the temple. The Rambam is of the position, and this is the position we follow halachically, that the Kedusha, the sanctity of Har HaBayit, remains. And that's why, even to this day, for those people who want to go on the Temple Mount, and they go through a whole procedure before they go to the mikveh and things, it doesn't completely create pure tahara, because there's still the impurities, the tumat meit, impurities of contact with a corpse, which would require the sprinkling of the ashes of the paraduma. But nevertheless, they go through a procedure, and even then, they only go on the outer perimeter of the mountaintop. And even then, there's a major machloket of whether or not that's permitted. That's all because of the Rambam's position. The Ravid, however, who is the one who attacks the Rambam, okay, and in the text of the Rambam, the Ravid is inserted. He inserted himself, not the printers inserted him, but he inserted into this machloket with the Rambam. And he maintains that after the Churban Bayit, after the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, the Kedusha of Har HaBayit is gone. And according to him, as a result, what is being offered here is not going to be offered the regular kinds of korbanot, but rather this mizbeach is considered like a bama. It's a lower level status. Now, where this is going to play a very interesting piece is in the article, when you'll have a chance to look it over. There's a number of good English articles. This is the quickest and simplest one. It's really just a quick survey of the issues, because the question of bama versus mizbeach also has a number of implications of what kind of korban can be brought there. The Malbim is of the position that this is considered a bama. It is not the same status as the regular mizbeach, and therefore there's only a subset of korbanot that would be permitted to be brought on this bama, among them the olot. The complete burnt offerings would be permitted, and therefore the Malbim reads into this phrase lahalot alav olot as a phrase being that's very precise, that the olot would be given there. Kakatuv b'Torat Moshe Shalokim. Yeah.
Are you talking about only the temporary that was built there, or the second?
So the interesting thing is the second Beit HaMikdash goes through a number of remodelings. Okay, if you remember, right, pretty close to its destruction is when Herod the Great, okay, rebuilt the Beit HaMikdash very much on the style of Roman architecture. That's the model that so many of us are familiar with. It's the model that the Holy Land Hotel preserves. It's the model that if you come to the Academy, you see in the display case, the copy of the Holy Land Hotel model. Before that, there was an earlier structure that had been built. That earlier structure started really to be built more at the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, who are still yet to appear on the scene. And before that was really the earliest fashion, which is in this parak. Now, in this parak, at this moment, there is no Beit HaMikdash that's been built. The only thing that has been constructed here is a Mizbeach. And we'll learn more about the Mizbeach in a minute. Yeah, Yafa.
So I'm just concerned with the language used to describe the Mizbeach. And it says, what other kind of Mizbeach could there possibly be?
Well, no, but it's talking about, it is building the Mizbeach. If you can look at it this way, this is
the Mizbeach that would have been on the site of
right. And in fact, we'll see in the very next.
Just says Yerushalayim. Say where.
Well, if you look at the very next pasuk, and I still want to get one more piece about it, Vayachinu hamizbeach al mechonotav, that they built this mizbeach on the foundations of the original mizbeach. It was precisely where they were supposed to build it.
So does its location determine whether it's a mizbeach or a bama?
No, the question will determine. So this is where it gets real interesting. And again, I'm going to go back to referencing this article once again. The mizbeach that will be built in the third Beit HaMikdash needs to be in precisely the same location where the mizbeach was in the second, which is precisely in the same location as where the mizbeach was in the first Beit HaMikdash. And so as a result, what we're saying now is this mizbeach is the mizbeach, or it is the next iteration of the mizbeach that had to be built. We'll see we're going to continue improving and building. We'll see why it's being built in the way it's being built. But what's fascinating, and I'm going to go back to still Pasuk Bet, who builds this Mizbeach? Yeshua ben Sadok ve'achav, according Uzrubavel Shaltiel ve'achav. In other words, there are 42,000 Jews who have returned. And the ones who take the responsibility for building the Mizbeach are the leadership. Now, I can look at this in two completely diametrically opposed ways. One way of looking at it is they said the only ones who should be building this, we're going to take this personal responsibility. This is the ultimate compliment for what's happening. The other way of looking at it is, where was everybody else? What, the only people available are the leadership? They're going to set it up. You know, sometimes you come into shul, sometimes you come in shul. I've had this happen to me on a pretty regular basis. This morning, in fact, someone came over to me in shul to complain that the tables weren't set up right in the base medrash. Okay. Now, the reality is, and what do you want from me? Okay, the reality is that what they wanted from me is to make sure it's built the right way. In other words, my role is a role of, you know, one of my favorite stories was many, many years ago, there was some construction done. There was a beautiful pile of dirt after that construction that was available. And that pile of dirt was removed one day, and I get a call, and I get someone to text me and says, Rabbi, they wasted good dirt. We should have used it for something. Okay, you have that sometimes, you know, those are extremes. So there are two ways of looking at it. Personally, when I first read this, the way I looked at it was, you know what? The leadership took responsibility. This was the most sacred piece they were going to do. This is what's taking you forward. And you read it and it says, oh, wow. But what we're also going to see in a minute is in Pasuk Gimel, it's not so simple because there's a reason. Yeah, Barry.
It's very common. We're going to build a show. Okay. Schleppers like me don't build a show. Big shots built the show, and I did the dirt. And when they say who built the show, it's Sam and Big Shot.
Right. So the difference will be. So the difference.
That's very common.
So right. So the difference is the use of two verbs. We find this, for instance, in Sefer Melachim, where we talk about Shveiv and Shlomo. Okay. We find this in Sefer Shemot, where we talk about Moshe. Now, interestingly, the Medrash is Vayakom Moshe. The Medrash isn't satisfied that Moshe actually did it through others. And so the Medrash talks about that Moshe was the one who miraculously had the walls come up, that he actually did it himself. But what's interesting here is you have two verbs. Vayakom is the first word, Vayivnu. Now, you could have gone by with just the word Vayiven or Vayivnu. They built, and that would play perfectly into the scenario you're presenting, that they were responsible. And because they were responsible, they were given, it was as if they built it. The fact that it says, it precedes it with Vayakum, and they went up and they built it, seems to imply, according to this other way of looking at it, seems to imply that they were personally very much involved. It's not, we don't know for sure. You're suggesting a very good alternative, but given that alternative, I'm not sure of the double verbs.
Then there's also the issue
Yeah.
of what was there wasn't such a grand structure.
No, well, the
Probably didn't take a lot.
100, yes, but it's still, but by the way, when you build a mizbeach of stones, okay, we're all now in the midst of getting ready for Pesach, right? And there are these big, heavy boxes some people have to schlep. Okay, now imagine those big, heavy boxes times 10 boulders. Imagine, you know, all of them that you'd need to build the mizbeach, because the mizbeach in the first Beit HaMikdash is a massive structure, and all you would need. I hear. I'm not fighting it. I'm just saying that there are alternative ways of looking at it. Alita, yeah.
And maybe it was the leadership's responsibility to incorporate. I mean, these people are just coming. They need leadership. Maybe the leadership should have said to them, you're responsible. for
Right.
this.
So you know what could have worked. What could have worked is if it says Vayiven, or if it would have had some phrase that all of the people jumped in and started working on things. You know, we're missing those pieces. We don't know. There are different ways of looking at it. Now, what we are going to see is also, just let's not forget for a minute, when Shlomo HaMelech built the Beit HaMikdash, he had 150,000 workers who were working on rotations, if you recall. Here, there are 42,000 Jews total who are showing up. And among those 42,000, it's very safe to say, not only men, women, and children, but men of varying ages. Okay, some who would be able to work, some who would not be able to work. In fact, we even see in a moment about the Kohanim. We'll get there, and I'm jumping way ahead of the picture. We don't know who exactly built it. It's possible to say it was just these two leaders. It's possible to say that it was everyone did it and they're getting the credit in a sense. And all of these are it's possible if it was these two leaders because they wanted to do it. It's possible these two leaders because they were the only guys left standing to be able to put it together. Yeah, Leah.
Didn't Shlomo have a lot of foreign workers?
He had foreign workers as well. We're going to see Sidon showing up in the picture as well in all of this. Vayachinu hamizbeach al mechonotav, and the mizbeach, no. And the mizbeach was built on its foundation, ki be'ema alehem, because they were afraid. Now, it was built on its foundation because it was afraid. So the Mitzudat David says, listen, let's understand what's happening, and we'll see it even better next week. If next parak, whenever that next parak will take place, we'll see it even better. And that is the Jews who came back are entering into a hostile environment. They have to contend with whom? Me'amei ha'aratzot. With the Amei ha'aratzot. Now, Amei ha'aratzot in this context does not mean the ignorant people, the people of the fields. This means people from other areas who are going to be fighting with them. So they're building the Mizbeach because they're afraid of them. Says Mitzudat David, this is the explanation of why they built it on the existing foundations, as opposed to clearing the foundations and building something brand new. That's his position. Why? Because they were scared. They had to do it quickly. They didn't have a choice. The Malbim says that this is the explanation for why everyone had to come. Because now everyone had to show up here. And as a result, by everyone having to show up, now I understand, because there's strength in numbers. You don't want to have a few people working on the Mizbeach. You want to show a mass of people, and that's your natural defenses. The Ibn Ezra suggests that they built this Mizbeach because of the fear, because this Mizbeach would be the way that they could best beseech HaKadosh Baruch Hu's assistance. So when we say they built the Mizbeach on its foundations because they were afraid of the Amei Haratzot, it could be describing how they built it. It could be describing who was involved in the building itself. It could even describe why they built it right now. They built it, why? Because they needed God's help. How they built it on old foundations as opposed to clearing them out and rebuilding it as well. And it could be why right now, because they waited for everyone to be for a defense. Yeah.
Despite the proclamation of Koresh, there's still a living in fear of the foreign nations that's coming on Haratzot around them to say, you have no right to do that. This land belongs to us.
Yeah, it sounds very much like November 29th, 1947. Okay, there's a vote of the United Nations. Wait, they voted, leave me alone. Yeah, that doesn't really work. Okay, the reality on the ground, or you could take even the situation today in Ukraine. Okay, everyone, is coming out against, let's condemn Russia for what they're doing. Okay, that's nice. Let's see what the realities on the ground are. They're afraid at this moment. There's something happening, and this is going to be expanded upon a little bit later. Part of their fear are going to be from people who identify with them. Okay, those are going to be the people who are the Gerei Arayot, who we refer to as the Samaritans. Those are going to be those people from the north who feel they are good Jews as well, and how come they're not being engaged to help on this project. We'll see all of these things play out. And then it says, Ve'alu alav olot laHashem olot laboker v'la'erev. Now on this Mizbeach, they're offering korbanot morning and night. Where morning and night korbanot, it's the korban tamid, the daily sacrifice of the Beit HaMikdash. Vaya'asu et chag haSukkot kakatuv. Now they started in Tishrei, right? Along comes Sukkot. They're able to celebrate Sukkot, as is written, va'olat yom b'yom b'mispar. And Sukkot, if you recall, is a holiday which each day's korbanot differ in the number of animals. And so they followed the exact procedure of Sukkot. Kimishpat dvar yom b'yomo, according to the rules of each day of Sukkot. Ve'achreichen, And after Sukkot, as Rashi notes, Olot Tamid, they continue with the Olot Tamid, with the daily sacrifices, Vila Chodashim, and also the special korbanot of Rosh Chodesh, Ulechol Moadei Hashem HaMekudashim, and all of the other sacred holidays of God, Ulechol Mitnadev Nedaval Hashem. And in fact, we add on at that point also other korbanot that people wanted to contribute to the Beit HaMikdash. Miyom Echad L'Chodesh HaShvi, this all starts from the first day of the 7th month, Rosh Chodesh Tishrei. Hechelu began, Lalot Olot LaHashem V'Eichal Hashem Lo Yusad. But what the Pasuk notes, they're bringing korbanot, but the Beit HaMikdash is not yet standing. Now, this pasuk, the Beit HaMikdash is still not standing, is the reason I sent out, and I also handed out this quick survey of the halacha. And the reason I did it is because of the fact that I'm just looking on the shelves. Excuse me one second. Is because I wanted to just take a little bit of a side note, and that is this idea of being able to offer a korban, even though the Beit HaMikdash has not yet been built, is something that appeared in a number of times in Jewish history, but most significantly, it came to the fore with the publication of this book called Drishat Zion. Drishat Zion was written by Rav Tzvi Hirsch Kalischer. He was a tremendous Talmid Chacham, and he actually is considered one of the two of the early religious Zionists. He and Rav Yehuda Alkalai were the two. Tzvi Hirsch Kalischer his halachic works are still included in the Shulchan Aruch, the way Mechosh Mishpat. But he wrote a letter in I'm just trying to get it right, in 1840, 1836 to Baron Rothschild. And in fact, in this edition, which was a special edition, they actually reproduced the letter from his handwriting. I don't know if you can see it. It's a long letter. They reproduced it. It's all handwritten. And it's got a beautiful handwriting. You can actually read it. And his letter to Rothschild was, to Usher Anshel Rothschild, was asking him to provide the funds to rebuild Eretz Yisrael. And where Kalischer did was, Kalischer in his works, he was the first modern significant halachic authority who said that we have to look at the coming of Mashiach in a very different perspective. The coming of Mashiach, according to him, begins with natural means. He has this beautiful phrase, Al Yachshov Shepitom Yitaka B'Shofar Gadol. Don't think that all of a sudden there's going to be a blast of a shofar, and all of a sudden the Beit HaMikdash is going to come down from the heavens. By the way, that is a position in the Chazal, that the Beit HaMikdash, the third Beit HaMikdash will come down from the heavens. Don't think that that's going to happen. Mashiach is going to come, but rather what we need to do is we need to first build the land. We need to have ingathering of exiles, and then Mashiach will be able to arise. This is a lot. If you hear those kind of words, you realize that the origins of religious Zionism of today. Okay? It's not necessarily we live in a Messianic era, but this is the way to bring about the Mashiach. Some say Messianic, some say not Messianic, but that's the way to do it. It's our permission that we have and our raison d'être, why we do so. Now, having said all of that, Rav Kalischer in his Drishat Zion also preserves a series of letters that he had together with Chassam Sofer. And with the Chassam Sofer arguing, and the Chassam Sofer ultimately agreed with him, that theoretically you should be able to bring korbanot, bismanazah, you should be able to bring sacrifices nowadays. But what about the Beit HaMikdash? And so bringing a proof, not only from here, but also from other Gemaras, from this pasuk and other Gemaras as well, Rav Kalischer puts forth the position, and it's accepted, that to bring sacrifices nowadays, you don't need a Beit HaMikdash. You need a Mizbeach. And then he goes step by step in trying to explain how we overcome all of the challenges. Challenge of impurity. Well, when it comes to communal sacrifices, Tumahutra B'tzibur, there's a principle that if there's no choice, the people can offer things even though they're tamei. That's the whole big question, if you remember, about why they had to wait so many days for lighting the Hanukkah menorah. They really could have lit it immediately with impure oil. They didn't need to wait to look but They waited because they wanted to make this into a more sacred moment. In addition to it, what about the big day kahuna? What about where the Mizbeach needs to be? One of the big stumbling blocks on this is how you can go onto Har HaBayit. So the Rav Kalisher actually held like the Ravid, that Har HaBayit doesn't have Kedusha nowadays. Let's hold like that position. All of those things that you have along the way is a fascinating series of conversations that really have a piece within this one pasuk we just read, that they were able to offer korbanot, even though there wasn't a Beit HaMikdash. Now, it gets a little easier when it gets to the Korban Pesach, which this article really deals with. And we have historical documents, both in the Gemara and elsewhere, which indicate that the Korban Pesach was offered after the second Beit HaMikdash was destroyed. It was still being offered. Rabbi Gamliel II actually is quoted in the Gemara. They're talking about that as well. It's a fascinating piece. I felt both because of the pasuk and because we're right before Pesach, it might be something you may want to look into. If you want, there's a much better article also by Rabbi J. David Bleich from a previous edition of Tradition. It's available online at traditiononline.org. If you want to look at it, there's a lot of things. All you have to do is, if you do a Google search and you put in Kalisher, you put in sacrifices, Temple Mount, you're going to get a wealth of information of his position and the machloket that he dealt with in his days. That's the side moment for a second. If you just notice, you see in this pasuk that even though the Heichal Hashem lo yusad, even though the Beit HaMikdash had not been set, its foundations hadn't been set, they were already offering korbanot. And then they also began to pay the artisans. Okay, so they began to pay the stonemasons and also the woodworkers. And then, just like Shlomo HaMelech had done, they turned to the people of Lebanon and they said, we need good wood. And so therefore, they provided for them food, drink, and oil. Oil was a commodity that was very valuable. And so they were able to provide it both to those, okay, they were able to provide it to those from Sidon and from Tzor, so that they would go ahead and bring the cedars of Lebanon, El Yam Yafo, to the Yafo port, to Jaffa port. Kirishyon Koresh Melech Paras Alehem, like they had permission from Koresh. Now, like they had permission from Koresh, there's another one of those phrases that when you look at it, it has all different meanings. Step number one, the Malbim says that actually Cyrus actually permitted all of this, that including bringing the cedars of Lebanon, he permitted that happening. And so therefore, this permission of Cyrus is talking about that last act of hiring the people from Lebanon to send the wood down. But there is also another way of looking at this phrase. They're building the Beit HaMikdash under the authority of a foreign nation, under the authority and the permission of another nation. This highlights the fact that we're not a free people building the Beit HaMikdash. We're doing it because Cyrus gave us permission to do it. And just as easily, and we'll see, he can take away that permission. And so it could be, in a sense, almost like La Havdil, the asterisk on Roger Maris's home runs, right? Okay, it was a longer season, you got an asterisk. We're building the Beit HaMikdash, asterisk at the top, because we're building it, but it's not us who has all the rights to it. We're working within these parameters of the Rishon of Cyrus. Pasuk Chet, Uvashana Shenit. Now in the second year, Levoam el Beit Elokim Yerushalayim, from when they came to the Beit HaMikdash, in Yerushalayim, b'chodesh hasheni. Now, if the second month obviously would be Iyar. Now, what's interesting about Iyar, and we'll see in a moment, Iyar in the time of Shlomo HaMelech was also, was the time when he started building the Beit HaMikdash. And so what they're trying to do in this, you'll see this both in Melachim Aleph, Perek Vav, Pasuk Aleph, you'll see Divrei Yamim Gimel, Divrei Yamim Bet, Gimel, Pasuk Bet. When they're rebuilding, remember they built the Mizbeach on the foundations of the first Mizbeach. It's like, there's continuity here. We're following procedures that had been done before. Why they waited till, it could entirely be because they couldn't do anything earlier. And this just happened, or it could be that there was clear planning throughout this process of when to do these kinds of things. Now, of course, unfortunately, their workforce is going to be very different. Hechelu Zerubbabel ben Shaltiel veYeshua ben Yotzadak, I'm sorry, Ushara Chehem HaKohanim v'Aleviim v'chol habayim meHashvi Yerushalayim. Then at that point, Zerubbabel and his family, Yeshua and his family, and everybody who came back from captivity. See, that phrase was missing when we were building the Mizbeach. And they went ahead and they started working, and they placed the Kohanim from the age of 20, Linnatseach. The Ibn Ezra says Linnatseach. Linnatseach normally means to be victorious, to succeed. The Ibn Ezra says what it means is l'chazek, that they were the ones who were making sure it was being done right. According to the Malbim says no, and so does Mitzudah David say the same way. L'natseach, they were kamo lam natseach. They were singing. They were providing musical accompaniments to this point of building. Just like you have musical accompaniment when you're bringing sacrifices, when you're doing the avodah in the Beit HaMikdash, this is part of that process as well. And so they were able to do it. L'natzeach, according to the Ralbag, actually, is not just to strengthen, but to hurry them along. Because remember, they have enemies who are trying to stop them from what they want to do. What's also interesting in this is that this is from 20 years and up. The Levium typically would work, according to the Chumash, they were working from 30 years and up. And so the 20 years and up actually goes back in Divrei Hayamim. We find that David HaMelech had already made this piece different. They had already started enlisting for the Levium to also start working from the age of 20. This is Divrei Hayamim Aleph that we have, Perek Chof Gimel, Pasuk Chof Zayin, that he had changed what had been the 30-year requirements. Okay, now the difference between the 20 and the 30-year requirement, there might be because there were different kinds of things that were being done. Here they were building versus the regular avoda, but we do see a precedence for this in the time of David as well. Vayamod Yeshua banav ve'achav Kadmiel uvanav bnei Yehuda ke'achad, and there was one group of Kohanim who were working. That's Yeshua and Kadmiel who were working with all of their families. L'natseach al usei hamlacha bebeit Elokim. They were the ones who were the lamnatseach people. They were the ones who were working. And then you also bnei Chinadad bneihem v'acheim halvim. Together with, it's an interesting piece. There are two different groups. You have Bnei Yeshua, Kadmiel, Yehuda, and then you have Bnei Chinadad, Bneihem v'Achem HaLeviim, and you have this other group. This other group also of Leviim and of Leviim. These other group are here going to be involved as well with the building. Group 1, Group 2. It's possible that they're both two groups doing building. It's possible that part of the group was involved in the Natseach, that part of the musical piece, and part was actual physical rebuilding. Vayisdu abonim et Heichal Hashem. And they placed the foundation for the Heichal Hashem, for the Beit HaMikdash. Vayamidu hakohanim melubashim bechatzotzrot, v'aleviim b'nei Asaf b'mitzil taim, lahalel et Hashem al yidei David melech Yisrael. And the Kohanim were dressed, okay, in this point, they were dressed in the big day kuna. They got all dressed up because of the joy that was happening. The Leviim, the Bnei Asaf, Mizmor La Asaf, this was the family of musicians. They were using their cymbals, and they were praising God, Al Yedei David Melech Yisrael, via David Melech Yisrael. Now, what does it mean? They were praising God via David Melech Yisrael. It's entirely possible. They were singing the Tehillim. They were following the procedures that David HaMelech had set up. And this is what it means. The celebration is beginning in the traditional, or the most traditional sense you can imagine. Yes?
Is this Asaf from the sons of Korah?
This is Asaf, yeah, Mizmor Asaf, the same Asaf. We continue. Vaya'anu b'halel u'vodot la'Hashem ki tov ki li'olam chasto, okay, al Yisrael. And what among the things they were singing Hodu Lashem Kitov Kili Olam Chasto, the version of it. V'chol ha'am Heriu Trua Gdola B'Halel Hashem, and all the rest of the people made these great sounds, something that we hadn't seen elsewhere. Al Husad Beit Hashem, because the Beit HaMikdash was now its foundations had been set. But we have a problem. V'rabim me'akohanim v'haleviim. However, many of the Kohanim and the Leviim, v'roshei ha'avot hazkenim, and also many of the leaders, the elders of Klal Yisrael who had come back, asher ra'u et habayit harishon b'yasdo, who had seen the first Beit HaMikdash when it was built. Zeh habayit b'neim bochim b'kol gadol. They're crying when they see what's been built here. V'rabim b'truah b'simcha larim kol. And there are others who are rejoicing. There are at this point two groups of Jews. They're the groups of Jews who are just celebrating what we've accomplished. And they're the group of Jews who are comparing what we have to what we had. Because this is less than 60 years. So there are people, if they were young people when they had gone into exile, and they're coming back, they're older people at this point, they look, that's a Beit HaMikdash. You're going to call that, you're going to celebrate what you put in the Beit HaMikdash. And in fact, if you look in Chagai, in the second parak of Chagai, you'll see that 26 years later, a similar kind of reaction happened. And so for those who have the Tanachim, if someone would just share with everybody what page it's on for Chagai, okay? And I'm just going to pull it up real quickly.
Around 1404.
1404? Okay. Now, if you look at that page, and I'm going to share the screen for those who may not have a Tanakh handy. Okay, Chagai, the second parak of Chagai, Bashvi'i b'esrim-v'achad l'chodesh hayad dvar Hashem b'yad Chagai Navi Lemor, Emorna el Zerubbabel ben Shaltiel Pachat Yehuda vel Yoshua ben Tzadak HaKohen HaGadol vel Sharita Am Lemor. Now, these are the same personalities. Chagai is talking to Zerubbabel and Yeshua. Who among you, who saw the Beit HaMikdash as in its original honor and glory? And what do you see now? It must seem like nothing, what you're seeing. He says, therefore, Zerubbabel, be strong, Yeshua, be strong, and all of the people, be strong, because I am with you. Just like I promised you when you left Egypt, I'm always going to be with you. So if you look, Chagai says exactly, he explains it even further, and this is years later that this Chagai is talking at this point, but it's a very, very painful piece of what has happened. Yeah, Leo.
It's reminiscent, I think, of that last Mora in Mako
With Rabbi Akiva.
Some people see it as positive, and other people.
I would suggest it's even more painful. In other words, if you remember that last Gemara in Makot, that's the famous story of Rabbi Akiva is walking with his colleagues, and they see a shu'al who's leaving the Beit Kodesh HaKodashim, and they're all crying. Rabbi Akiva mitzachek. Rabbi Akiva is laughing. And they can't figure out why Rabbi Akiva is laughing. Rabbi Akiva says that just like the promise had come that there would be a destruction, there was also a promise that there will be a rebuilding. And therefore, now that I see the first prophecy has been fulfilled, I believe that the second prophecy, the rebuilding, will be fulfilled. And they say, Nichamtanu Akiva, Nichamtanu, and they say, you've comforted us, Akiva, you've comforted us. Here, they're seeing what seems to be the fulfillment of the promise, but the promise isn't as fulfilled as they had hoped. It's like, you're going to have another Beit HaMikdash. And so what's in their mind's eye, that second Beit HaMikdash is going to be as glorious as the first Beit HaMikdash. And in essence, the second Beit HaMikdash at this point was a little better than a hut. It wasn't something, it was built under enemy attack. It was built very quickly we don't have the same, there's not the same beauty that is associated with it. We'll see, you're not talking about the gold and the silver and the fine woodwork. It's a very utilitarian structure that they put up, and they're able to use the Beit HaMikdash. And so the people, it's the people who remembered, they're disappointed. Or is it- Yeah.
I feel like that's like a negative on those people.
Yeah.
Like here they, they're looking at it and they're crying, but my God, that's what you're missing. I don't know. I
So,
feel like-
so what's interesting is the text doesn't say positive or negative. The text just reports there's a tumult. And by the way, in the midst of this tumult, there's some people crying and there's some people rejoicing. And you find this, by the way, at other amazing moments. To go back, let's go back to May 14th, 1948. It's Erev Shabbat. They declare the state of Israel. We see all the pictures of the people, the pictures of the people dancing the Hora in Tel Aviv. And then there were the people who were fully aware, oh my God, this war is going to get even worse, that they're in the middle of, because they've made the declaration. That, by the way, was the position of the majority of the nations of the world, and it was the position of people within the Yishuv as well. They were nervous, they were scared, and they weren't sure if Ben Gurion had made the right move. And I'm not comparing Ben Gurion, obviously, to Zerubbabel and to Yeshua, because they had 3 Nevi'im working with him at the same time. But you can have this combination of joy and fear happening. The Navi, the Ezra doesn't diminish it at this point, but just to take one more, Jim, you have one more comment?
Were they doing sacrifices in Bavel or not?
No, you can't do, but they can't do Bavel.
Only in Yerushalayim.
Only Yerushalayim you can do. There was an interesting phenomena, which in Egypt, in Elephantine, in Yeb, where they had built the Beit HaMikdash. There was the Mikdash of Chonyo. And it's a fascinating story in and of itself, and how they could do it, what happened, but it wasn't something that was sanctioned. The last pasuk of the parak, and at this point, the people really aren't able to distinguish these two sounds. All that you can hear is this extraordinary tumult going on, and you can hear it from far away. You don't know what kind of tumult you're hearing. You're hearing a combination of both. And by the way, that is one of the positives of what's happening now. It isn't one attitude overwhelms the other. Both attitudes coexist. There is nothing that's being said that this is right or this is wrong. And if you look at just the very next pasuk, Vayishma'u tzarei Yehuda v'Inyamin ki v'nei hagolah bonim echal Hashem Elokei Yisrael. Okay, this tumult then leads to the very next step. The very next step being, the people you didn't want to have get involved, the ones who are going to create problems for us. Remember we finished Megillat Esther not long ago. Tzorer HaYehudim. Right? Haman was the Tzorer HaYehudim, was the person who was oppressing us. And here, V'yishma'u tzarei Yehuda, the same phrase. Okay, what's going on? So we know there's going to be a problem that's arising. We'll get to the problem that arising next time when we learn together. My one question, Barry, yeah, your one question.
The timing. It should be 71 years after the destruction.
Well, no, it is 71 years after one of the exiles. It's 58 years, 59 years after the destruction. It still hasn't hit the 70th. Remember,
Then the prophecy was wrong.
well, no, it said 70 years. Remember, we dealt with this 2 weeks ago, I think we dealt with this 2 weeks ago, because there are two measures. There's a measure of a 70, there's two different psukim that we deal with in Yirmiyahu. And those two different measures talk about to Bavel, and the other talk about to the Churban Yerushalayim. So there is going to be the 70th year, right? And that's where we're starting. It's a little bit earlier, and we'll see that there's going to be a halt, a cease and desist order that's coming up. Yafa, and
Does
then
anybody talk about in Pasuk Ches, the Chol HaBayim V'Hashvi Yerushalayim? There's an ongoing aliyah.
right, and not only is there, we do know there's an ongoing, but we use the word ba'im often, haBa'im Mitzrayma. Okay, which is a hoven in Muvanav Avar, the same way it came. So we do have it. So I don't know if that's a problem. I think the key phrase here, though, that you have is Mehashvi Yerushalayim. This is an exclusionary phrase. The ones who are involved in this process are Yeshua, Zerubbabel, their families, and those who have come back. Well, what about those who were there? It's just the ones coming back from captivity, and that creates part of that tension that we're going to be seeing and the attacks that's going to be happening. So we are limiting to who's involved in this process. All right, I'm going to stop right now, but next week is the week before Pesach. Okay, so the question I have for everyone is, are we meeting or not?
Let's learn.
Yeah.
Okay, so next week, for me, it's not too much. You're sitting next to the person, it might be too much for. Next week, we're going to have our shir. During Pesach, we will not have shir. Okay, but everyone, for those who are, I know,
Well, it's up to you.
the day after Pesach, we'll figure it out next week. Next week, same time, same place. Everyone should have a wonderful rest of your day.